Good evening, everybody. My name's Murph, and I'm an alcoholic. Can you give me like a 5-minute warning that I'm okay? Good. And you said this was videotaped? Oh no, I'm just playing. Sorry about that. I have to do something to get myself off of my share. You know, how blessed am I? I just got off of the golf course about 40 minutes ago. Didn't have time to think about what I'm going to say tonight. So I'm going to wing it. I just pray that something I say tonight, God intended for one of you. And my share almost starts out like a movie. You know, there was a knock at the door. I was 10 years old, and like an inquisitive kid, I was on my mom's robe tail, and she opened the door, and my brother, who was bigger than life to me, was standing, and he was holding his 3-week-old baby in his arms. And he looked at my mother and he said, "I don't want this child. Either you take her or I'm giving her away." So alcoholism and heroin addiction had taken my brother to a place where he didn't want his own child. And I was not to see my brother again. And we took my niece. My mom took my niece. We soon adopted her. She became my sister. And I went from being the baby of the family with all the attention to the middle child with no attention, or at least in my mind, no attention. You know, and alcoholism centers in our mind. And I had alcoholism way before I ever picked up a drink. I'm an alcoholic because I can never drink safely again. But I have alcoholism, and I'll get to that a little later. And at the same time, real close to that time, my father got his dream. I'm a Murph, and so my father bought a bar in San Francisco on the waterfront, and he became absent in my life. And so between 10 and 11, I lost the 2 male figures in my life. My grandfather played for the Yankees and the Cubs. My father played professional football, and yet I never had a ball thrown to me. And so this became the beginning of a dialogue that started in my head. And, you know, we have this ego. Our book says that ego has to be smashed, but the ego creates this false self. And it's that self that tells me I'm not good enough, you know, and things like that. And if you go back, or if you can remember cassette tapes, you know, where how you used to take your favorite song and you'd record it on your cassette tape and you'd have this whole cassette tape. Well, I think we all have this mixtape. And this thing I created plays back negative and, I don't know, destructive messages that I get from different sources, like from family, you know, from my family, from teachers, from work, from friends, from all different places. And we all have this hit you where it hurts mixtape that we play back, you know, and it says that we'll never be good enough. No one will ever like me. I'm ugly. No one will ever love me. Why do I feel so alone? And so, you know, I at the beginning of my childhood, this is when I'm already into this thinking, and I become angry and I become resentful. And I want to say this, you know, meetings in a lot of places have become this place where people come to be entertained. And the solution of Alcoholics Anonymous is not shared. It's how good is my prison story, or how many cars did I wreck? And people are in awe of this. I'm in awe of the person that's living a happy, joyous, and free life outside of these rooms. And so, you know, when I say that, because I'm not going to share a whole big drunkalogue with everybody. You know, when I was that young and I started this self-talk, this dialogue that went on in my head, I needed something to shut it off. And athletics was the first thing. So I played athletics from sun up till sundown, and it got me out of my head. And then years later, because I was a late starter, I picked up the first drink, and I don't know if it was the first drink or the second drink or the third drink, but I was no longer thinking about my brother leaving and my father not being there. I was no longer thinking of, not being loved and being abandoned and all these other things that go on in the head. And that alcohol shut that off. And I wasn't thinking of the future. And where alcohol took me was right into the moment that I was in, exactly where I was. And for the first time, I looked around and I was with my friends and we were at this party and I was drinking and I started to enjoy myself because I wasn't thinking. And that was the allure of alcohol. And I chased it and chased it and chased it. I became a professional drinker when I joined the service, at 18 years old. Fixed my license, would go to all the bars in the surrounding areas and drink. We drank inside the barracks every single night. And I became a professional drinker, at 18 years old. And by the time I was out of the service, I wouldn't say I was full blown alcoholic, but I sure was on the border. I was a very hard drinker. And I got a bar job a little bit afterwards, after I got out of the service. And it was at like one of the most popular nightclubs on the peninsula where I live. And I became the guy. I became the lead bartender. This place was just full all the time. And so I had all the alcohol I wanted. And you knew who to serve. You served the right bartenders, and you would go in their bar and you would drink for free. And so I was drinking all the time, not paying for anything. And I loved it. It was my entire life was this bar. I went away to a beautiful tropical place to open up one of our nightclubs, and I never saw the water. I was inside the bar the entire time, and I went to bars. My girlfriends were bartenders and waitresses. I just, my whole life was this bar, and I loved it. I enjoyed it. I had tons of fun, And then as the drinking went on, I got to near the end of the drinking, and it stopped working. And what I mean by it stopped working was that no matter how much I drank, it didn't shut this off anymore. And I would have to keep drinking and drinking and drinking to oblivion until I passed out. And I was laying down on the sofa. I was back at my mom's house, and my mom would always take me back in, always. She would always take me back in. Every time something happened, she would take me back in. And I was passed out on the couch, and I awoke to my sister and my two sisters, that little 3-week-old baby. She was now a grown lady with a child of her own. And they said, either you get help or you get out. And I said some pretty nasty things. And, I was to look at them and leave after I said things to my mom. But, the one thing I do know today, and to any single mother or any mother that's struggling with a child, she would have never got me back if she hadn't given me away. If she hadn't let me go, she would have never gotten me back. I would have continued to use her until it was over. And so, it began a process of one of the best things that ever happened to me. I drank for another year. I lived on the living room floor of a friend's house. And after about a year, he had a closet, and they collected all these beautiful bottles of liquor for Christmas, for birthdays. And they had like 70 bottles that just went all the way back into the back end of this closet. And I drank every single one of them and put them back into the boxes, put the empties back into the boxes. And I went on a 3-day run one night and got back, and they had all the empty bottles on their dining room table. And they looked at me, and he was the last friend that I had. And he said, "You get help or you get out." And I had nowhere else to go. I had burned every bridge in my life. And so I went to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and I don't remember it at all. I don't remember the first few. I was detoxing in the rooms, which you should never do. Detoxing should be done under medical supervision. And but I detoxed in the room, and at that time, I don't think there was a day, not one day within years, that I hadn't taken drinks, that I hadn't drank. And it was a lot of years. At one point before, I ended up in my mother's for the last time, I was probably drinking a fifth a day. I was at another bar that I was running. And so I started Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I don't know anybody that came into Alcoholics Anonymous that was thinking that they were going to be stopping drinking forever. There was a bunch of little like statutes, I'm gonna come in here, I'm gonna stop drinking, and then I'm gonna get this, and 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 then I'm gonna be okay. Because I think that I can be fixed by things outside of myself. Thousands of alcoholics spend their lives chasing things they think will bring them satisfaction, contentment, and joy, and only to end up frustrated and discontent. It may be money, position, higher levels of education, maybe to be number one in some sport. Some of us want to own better cars, bigger houses, boats. And, we feel excited for a short time, but soon we feel empty. And we all seek to be happy, but sometimes, we end up like wasting years pursuing things that are like empty wells. And the one thing I know today for alcoholics is that God can bring me joy without things, but things without God will never bring me joy. And I don't understand it. And I got all these things. I got a great job with the Teamsters. I was making a lot of money. I got a new place of my own, brand new car. I got all these things in the first 2 years. But Alcoholics Anonymous cannot be worked from the outside in. It has to be worked from the inside out, because one of our characteristics is this unsatisfiable mind. And it's unsatisfiable because I'm trying to fill a hole inside of me with things outside of me. And it doesn't work for the alcoholic, ever. And so I got all these things, and I'm thinking that I'm doing Alcoholics Anonymous. I think I did the first 3 steps. I had a sponsor that I never used. I had a lot of well-intentioned people that used to say things like meeting makers make it. Commitments will keep you sober. Your sponsor will keep you sober. And that's not my experience. Although those 3 things in and of themselves can't keep me sober, and all those 3 things are so vitally important for the new person, they're not going to bring me a happy, joyous, and free life. And so, meetings bring me closer to the power that keeps me sober. Commitments bring me closer to the power that keeps me sober. My sponsor brings me closer to the power that keeps me sober. And I'm a knucklehead. And today I have to remind myself of that. There's only one thing that will keep me sober, and that's God. And I don't know why we have to try to exhaust every single option there is before we get to that place where we surrender and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to give this Alcoholics Anonymous a shot. It's beautiful. I used to say to myself, I go to Alcoholics Anonymous and I don't do the steps. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. And yet I thought because I got all this stuff, everything was good, but it wasn't good. And after 2 years, I convinced myself that I could drink again. People say, oh, I started to drink because I stopped going to meetings. Well, you know what? Something happens before that. Either I lose that conscious contact with God, or I never had God. And that's why I stopped going to meetings. On my will, I'll stop going to meetings. And then you know what the scariest part is? The scariest part is I don't need God to not drink. I did it for 2 years and for 8 years. I need God to have a happy, joyous, and free life. Our book tells us we believe that God's will for us is to be happy, joyous, and free. For that, I need this power. So I drink and I it's hilarious. I'll just tell this much. I decided I was going to do some controlled drinking. Don't we all? I can do this. I can drink like a normal person, right? And so I decide that I'm going to relapse, and that relapse was premeditated. I knew I was going out. I knew it before I took that drink, right? And so my idea of controlled drinking was St. Patty's Day in Las Vegas. And that's where I started drinking again. And it wasn't 2 or 3 drinks before I was off and running. And I was out there for 2 years. And I tried to hurt myself 2 years later, again in a Las Vegas hotel room. And I put 32 stitches and 32 staples into my wrists. And I didn't know that you needed to cut this way and not this way. And I just ripped my wrists apart. And I remember I got kicked out of the hotel. I can't go into the whole story, it'd take too long, but I got kicked out, ended up getting kicked out of the hotel, and I'm standing, and I call my sister, and she can't Western Union me the money until the next day. And so I walk into a store and I have my card, and I had lost everything, but on my card was the exact amount of money to get me a 5th of vodka and a pack of cigarettes. And I used that to make because I couldn't go a whole night without drinking, and I used that, and so I got back, and one of the union guys was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he got me into this really good rehabilitation place, and I rehabbed for 30 days, and I got out of there, and it took another 1.5 years before I got so miserable, in Alcoholics Anonymous, that I came to that place that either I'm going to find a spiritual solution, or I'm just going to go down to the bitter end, with this head and alcohol. And I laugh because I throughout a lot of times in Alcoholics Anonymous, I lived in the kingdom of dry. I call it the kingdom of dry, and instead of your highness, it was your dryness, who was me. And I suffered from drypolar, this disease of being dry, and these incredible highs and these incredible lows, and never being just okay, never being in the middle, and so I finally start working the steps, and there's something that's very important that I'm about to say right now. The first 3 steps are so important, and they can't just be mulled over and read as questions. I have to understand my disease, right? I have to have a full surrender. I have to ask God in. and I have to start turning my will and my life over to God. And so I didn't really do that. I was asked questions and I said yes to them, because there's a big difference between compliance and surrender. And I was in compliance, and I thought I would say what my sponsor wanted me to say. And so when you do Alcoholics Anonymous on your will, when I do the steps on my will, right? When I get to that fourth step, I'm going to be dishonest. I'm going to not do it, thoroughly. And I'm going to be in fear. And so I walked through the steps as best as I could. And the one good thing that came out of the first set of steps was, here you go, Kathy, was I get a call from that little 3-week-old baby, my adopted sister. And she says, I'm looking for my father. I'm looking for your brother. And she had 3 children at the time, and she wanted to find out the medical background for the kids. And I get a call a few weeks later, and she says, I found my father, my father, your brother. And he was serving he was in a 17th year of a life sentence in prison. And he told her he wanted to write me. And I hated him. I hated my brother. I hated my father. And I said, I don't care, whatever. And a little while later, I go to the mailbox and I open up the mailbox, and there's the letter from my brother. And the letter said that I was wrong not to be your big brother, that I was wrong to leave you with your father. And he said a few other things. And he said, is there anything I can do to make this right? And that sounded really familiar. And it turned out for 16 of the 17 years, he was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in the prison, and that he facilitated meetings within the prison. And I wrote him a nasty letter back, because I was still an untreated alcoholic. And by untreated, I mean I did not have a God in my life. And so I get another letter back from him after I wrote him the nasty letter. And he said in the letter, I didn't do this for you. He said, I did this for me, and I thank God that you were brought into my life, because today I feel freer than I've ever felt before. Here's a man that's locked behind bars, that through his amends felt free. How powerful is that this 9th step can free us like that? And he said that the biggest prison he's ever been in is the prison of his own mind, and that he found God, and God unlocked the door, and his life changed. And he had purpose in prison and freedom. And we were to begin a correspondence. He's been in prison for 44 years now. And he's the most spiritual man that I know. That's what Alcoholics Anonymous is all about. It's about mending relationships. It's about growing with new relationships. And I did the rest of the steps. And after that 12th step, I was like, woohoo! Let the pigeons loose. Life is about to begin. I've worked the steps. Everything's going to be great. Well, I didn't read on any further. and I didn't do much else after that. I was to work the steps a couple more times. A couple more times I was to do the steps. And one day short of 8 years, I decided that I could drink again. And I went back out for 2 more years. And I got back and it was the same thing. I spent 39 days in the hospital. I was so sick. I was 5150 because I tried to harm myself again. And the power of alcoholism. After the 39 days that I was in the hospital, there's a hill you walk down and you get down to the street. And at the street level is where I get the bus to go home. And as I got down to that street, after all I had been through, I looked to my left and my first thought is, I know there's a bar 1 block away. It's the only relief I had ever known that truly worked was alcohol. I didn't have anything else at that time. And so God came in the form of a bus. And the bus pulled up right in front of me and the doors opened. And I had this 10-second period of grace. And I walked onto that bus instead of walking to the bar. And I started my my sobriety that I'm into now. I just celebrated 13 years on the 14th. And I knew I needed to get going right away. And I found somebody, I worked the steps, and about 3 years in, I'm sitting there untreated. And I walk into a meeting in San Francisco, and there's this guy speaking. And he's sharing in a way that I've never heard anybody share before. And after the meeting, I walk up to him and I go, I'm dying in Alcoholics Anonymous. Can you help me? And he said, it would be my honor to help you. And we met and we sat down, and he asked me a lot of questions. You know, he wanted to know if I was a real alcoholic. And afterwards, he looked at me and he said, are you ready to stop working Murph's Anonymous? And Murph's Anonymous is picking and choosing the parts of this program that I want to do, expecting the beautiful promises and the results that you get from working Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was done. I was absolutely done. I was as low as I could possibly be. And I finally surrendered. And I surrendered everything. I finally understood that Murph's life, run by Murph's will, does not work, nor had it ever worked. All I had to do was look back at my track record, right? And I should know right away. And so, you know, I had been living in this dream world, this fantasy world for so long. And I'm going to read this. I brought this just in case I wanted to put it in here. I'm going to read this. And this was me sober, an alcoholic, not sober. This was me not drinking. And I wrote this. I found this sheet of paper that I had written years ago. And it said, I don't go after what I truly want, because then the dream will end. I'm so used to living in that dream world, it's become a part of me. If I continue to do this, nothing will be accomplished. I will continue to go through this mundane life, being satisfied to just be able to exist. I am coming to find, and it's a frightening place, it's not success or failure I fear, it's the loss of the dream. And I lived in this fantasy world of what ifs and if onlys. And I became where I couldn't even differentiate the true from the false, like it talks about in the book. And when I surrendered that. I surrendered everything. And what happened was it opened up my mind just enough for the idea of God to enter. God loves us so much, he won't enter our lives without our permission. And all I had to do was ask God in. And my sponsor told me that now you can't sit on the couch watching Netflix expecting God to start doing things for you in your life. He said, it's time now, Murph, to start seeking and searching something that's comfortable for you, something that you can gain trust in, something that you can have faith in. And I began this process. I started reading things. I had damned the Christian faith for years and years and years, and yet I knew nothing about it. See, what I learned is that when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I thought I had a problem with God. But I didn't have a problem with God. I didn't have one. What I had a problem with was your God, was what you told me about God, was what I had come from in religion and different things like that. And I had never tried to form a relationship with God myself. And I actually read the Bible cover to cover in one of, as part of me getting rid of that prejudice that I had, of finding out what it was really about. I had a spiritual advisor, my best friend, who's an amazing man, and he walked me through it and he answered questions in ways I had never heard before. And I started to have trust and faith. And I got to the third step, and in the third step, it says that I made a decision to turn my will and my life, my thinking and my actions over to the care of this power. And I began to do that when I started thinking these thoughts, because I'm still an untreated alcoholic and I still have that false self that talks to me, and it talks to me with great authority, right? It's my voice, but I don't know it's telling me lies. I can't see that yet. And I get to that third step and I make that decision, and I get to the fourth step. And for the first time, I do the fourth step on God's will and not Murph's will. And by doing the step in God's will, I do it honestly, I do it fearlessly, and I do it thoroughly. But what also happened was that I always looked at my father for what he had done to me. And I had never looked at what happened to my father. What caused my father to be the way that he was? And I started asking questions. Regrets come from unasked questions. And I started to ask questions. And what I found out, that was during World War II, my father's job was to go into the Jewish prisoner of war camps and get the prisoners out of the camps. And my uncle said that what my father saw changed him. When he got home, he wasn't the same man. At a picnic, my father's first wife was stung by a bee in the throat. It swelled in. She suffocated and died right in front of him. My brother was there. That bar that was his dream, he ended up going bankrupt on it. We lost the bar, we lost our home. And for the first time, I saw a man who I had hated for 45 years, and I had empathy for him. And I saw that I had wasted so many years of my life hating him, and I didn't know his story. We have resentments against people, and we don't even know their stories. The truth heals. And when I found out the truth about my father, I began to heal. When we find out the truth about things, the truth is the greatest healer that there is. And I seek to find truth in everything now. And I do it with God by my side. And I did all my resentments. And I did an incredible fifth step. And I sat there for an hour and I looked back at it because I wasn't leaving anything out. I had left things out. Every time I had done the steps, I had left things out. And what happened was that I remained blocked. right? And so I would only have glimpses of God. I used to pray to this cosmic slot machine, and you throw a prayer in and you pull the handle and you hope that it comes true, right? And you keep doing it and keep doing it, and it doesn't come true, and I pick something else. Oh, God doesn't exist. He's not doing it the way I want him to do it. Isn't that unbelievable? I'm going to tell God what he should be doing. I started to get more trusting and more faith. And I got to that 6th and 7th step. The 6th and 7th step are short in the big book for a reason, because they're none of my business. They're God's business. I'm giving God all of me, good and bad. I don't know what character defects are or what assets are. I have no idea, right? I'll give you an example. I was procrastinating on going to school, and I kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And I started to have an attitude about it. My sponsor goes, "What in the heck is the matter with you?" And I said, "I keep procrastinating on going to school." And he goes, "You think procrastination is your problem?" And I said, "Well, yeah." He looked at me, he goes, "What are you afraid of?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "What are you afraid of?" And I sat down with him and I told him all my fears. One of them was, I'm afraid I won't make the grades. I never did like high school very well, and I was afraid I wouldn't make the grades. And he looks at me and he goes, "You've never walked into a college classroom, you've never opened a college book, and yet you know that you're not going to do well?" He goes, "It's a lie that false self tells you. It's not true." And we gave every lie to God. One of them, which was crazy, I go, "I'm afraid I can't afford school." And he goes, "How much does it cost?" And I go, "I don't know." I was afraid I couldn't afford school, and I didn't even know how much school cost. And I convinced myself I couldn't do it. It was a lie. I gave it to God. And when I came out of that, and all the fears I had given to God, all these lies, because they were all lies. Fear is an illusion. Fear is me trying to figure out the future, what's going to happen. Future events already ruined. I've already figured out and made decisions, and I've never even taken the first step towards these things. But what happened was I was free in my mind, and an intuitive thought came in. And that thought said, "Hey, one of your best friends went to college at 49 years old. Why don't you call him?" I had never even thought about that because I was so into my own head, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to do it. And I called my friend up, and we went and worked over some stuff, and I enrolled in college 2 days later. And I held a 3.9 grade point average. All of those were lies. And procrastination wasn't my problem, fear was. And I was to learn that each and everything, like procrastination, anger, all of these things come from the 4 things that I see in my 4-step: self-centeredness, self-seeking, dishonesty, and fear. My defects come out of these things. I don't need to work on the character defects. When I hear somebody say, "I'm working on my character defects," I go, "Good luck," right? I don't need to, because as I see the fear, as I see my self-centeredness, as I see my dishonesty, the things that need to go away with no work of my own, with God's work. And I got to my 8th and 9th step, and I made all my amends. And after I was through, for the first time, I was unblocked. For the first time, I was free of anger and resentment. For the first time, I felt content. And my sponsor looked at me at page 104, which is the last page for the 12th step. And he said, "I want you to show me on this page where it says the end." And I went, "Huh?" He goes, "Show me where it says the end." And I said, well, it doesn't. He goes, that's right. And we started the process. I have a daily reprieve contingent upon, I say, my spiritual connection. What is that reprieve from? Have you ever asked yourself, I get a daily reprieve. What's the reprieve from? I get a reprieve from my thinking, right? My problem is my thinking and my perceptions, and it's always been that way. I had this thing about my father. I had this thing about my brother. I had this thing about work. I had this thing about mom. I had this thing about that. They weren't the problems. The problem was what I thought about them and how I perceived them. And I started that process through that 10th step, of making sure that I never got blocked again. Now we go through this 11th step, and my friend calls them the vultures. And on awakening, the vultures are up on the bedposts, and they're looking down at me. And when I open my eyes, they say, "Hey, we've been waiting for you to wake up. Let's talk about how unappreciated you are at work. Let's talk about how the girlfriend disrespected you last night. Let's talk about this and that's that and that." Before I can get my foot off the bed, I can be gone if I don't surrender right when my eyes open. I don't allow those vultures in anymore. And the first thing I do is surrender. The first thing I do when my eyes open is, God, my life run by my will doesn't work, and alcohol will never be the answer. And I surrender completely. And then I ask God in. And I ask God to direct my thinking, like it says, let it be void of selfish, self-centered, self-seeking, fear, thoughts, right? Let me see what I can bring into the flow of things today. Let me see who I can bring happiness to. One of the biggest joys for me is making someone smile. The biggest joy is working with another alcoholic, and I sponsor a few guys. And by doing this every single day, you can't take a day off for vacation. You can't say, hey, guess what? I'm feeling kind of tired this morning. Oh, I'm late for work. This or that. Right? Because it only takes 24 hours away from God for that ego to start coming in. That ego is just sitting there, and he's just waiting for you to get rid of God so that he can jump in. Because my ego wants to separate me from my fellows, from my God, and from my true self. Right? And so as you do this on a day, it's got to be the most important thing in your life. If it's not important enough, I'll find an excuse. If it's important enough, I'll find a way. And so I started to make that the most important thing in my life. Today, the most important thing in my life is a conscious contact with God. It's not Alcoholics Anonymous. Because without that conscious contact with God, I don't have AA. I had the AA where I used to come to the meetings because it gave me relief for an hour. For an hour, I got out of my head. And then I spend time with friends and things like that. And I'm not saying all my time was bad. I did have happy times throughout those times in Alcoholics Anonymous. Today, I have joy. When I retire at night, I look back at my day every single night. I do not miss a night. I do not miss a night on vacation. Where was I selfish today? Where was I dishonest today? Where was I fearful today? Where was I self-seeking today? You see, I'll never become so spiritual as I stop being human. But I have to start becoming aware of how I think. And I started to see my thoughts. And as I grew in this conscious contact with God, the next thing you know, I'm walking down the street and a thought would come to me and I'd go, whoa. I started to make that pause. And it says agitated or doubtful. A lot of us forget doubtful, right? And that pause is to bring God in. And I do it every day because if I don't do it today, I'm less likely to do it tomorrow. And so I look back at my day. I looked at what did I bring in, what good things I do today. We're not to have morbid reflection, right? This is supposed to be a growing and a beautiful process. And I started to do that, right? And I did this every day. And I look back and I found out that you can't stay clean on yesterday's shower, right? What I do yesterday, I can't bring that in today. The 11th step is the greatest sleeping pill there ever was because it frees my mind of today. And I can go to bed clean. And I can go to sleep and I hit my pillow. And I heard someone say, and I love this, was I hit my pillow, all those bad thoughts fall out of my ear, right? And I hit my pillow. And when I wake up, I'm free. And so I see it that way. Today, a conscious contact with God is the most important thing in my life. Like I said, it is everything to me. I bring God into everything I do. And I will look at each and every one of you that I can look in. There's quite a few people here. And I can tell you that I wouldn't trade me with any single one of you. I love Murph. I love my life. I love everything about it. Alcoholics Anonymous has brought me to a place where I am a happy, joyous, and free person 95% of the time. I have bad moments, but I never, ever have bad days, ever. Right? Alcoholics Anonymous has given me a life that I do not deserve. And this beautiful, wonderful God that stays with me every single day of my life. Thank you so much for allowing me to share tonight with you. Thank you.